Hello, and welcome to this week's midweek mini lesson. We are in Ephesians 4, starting in verse 17 and going to the end of the chapter. So here we go. It says, "So I tell you this and insist on it in the Lord, that you must no longer live as the Gentiles do, in the futility of their thinking. They are darkened in their understanding and separated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them due to having hardened their hearts. Having lost all sensitivity, they have given themselves over to sensuality, so as to indulge in every kind of impurity with a continual lust for more. You, however, did not come to know Christ that way. Surely you heard of him and were taught in him in accordance with the truth that is in Jesus. You were taught with regard to your former way of life to put off your old self, which is being corrupted by its deceitful desires, to be made new in the attitude of your minds, and to put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness." I want to stop there for a second and just emphasize the distinction here between the old self and the new self, between the Gentiles and who Paul is talking about here. And he's basically saying, look, you did it right. You didn't worry about the sensuality of your bodies. This was something that you put off the old self that's being corrupted that way and put on the new self with a new attitude of your mind. And it was to be created like God in true righteousness and holiness. That line, though, to be created like God, is so important because you're seeing that this is actually the desire of God to have people that are becoming more and more like Him. Verse 25 continues, it says, "Therefore each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to his neighbor, for we all are members of one body." I mean, that just in and of itself, basically, don't speak things that are not true. Only speak the truth. In your anger, verse 26, in your anger, do not sin, which is really interesting. So, in your anger, do not sin, which means that sin is not an anger, or anger is not a sin. It says, in your anger, don't sin. In other words, you can be angry and not be sinful. Jesus was angry. He went into the temple and overturned tables and cast people out and made a whip and drove out people and animals with it. I mean, the anger is the problem, but anger is not sinful. Don't continue along the line and make what made you angry make you sinful. So in your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold. That's a huge line. Don't let the sun go down while you're still angry. In other words, settle anything that you have with anybody else before the day's over. Go to bed knowing that you've done everything you could to make things right. And then don't give the devil a foothold. This is specifically about anger, obviously, but that line is so important just in general because when we kind of step our toe towards the line of sin, or when we get really close to doing something and you kind of see how far you can push that limit, you're literally giving the enemy an opportunity to use that as a foothold. Instead of just slamming the door in his face, you're allowing him to stick his foot in the door where you can't fully pull it shut anymore. And it makes it all that much more hard to get rid of that problem in the future. So don't give the devil a foothold. Verse 28, he who has been stealing must steal no longer, but must work, doing something useful with his own hands, that he might have something to share with those in need. Verse 29, do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouth, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. And verse 30, do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, with whom you are sealed for the day of redemption. Get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger, brawling and slander, along with every form of malice. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving one another, just as God and Christ forgave you. So in these last couple of verses, it's really important, I think, to understand is a lot of this has to do with your speech still and your anger and stuff like that. And then it goes into verse 30 and it says, and do not grieve the Holy Spirit. So what does it mean to grieve the Holy Spirit? It means to do things that are against what he's saying. In 1 Thessalonians 5, it says not to quench the Holy Spirit. That means don't stop what he's doing, but not to grieve the Holy Spirit is a little bit different. It's not just stopping what he's doing, but it's doing alternatively of what he said to do. So it's kind of, think like the Jonah thing, right? He was told to go to Tarshish, to Nineveh, but instead he went the other direction and went to Tarshish. It's not just that he didn't obey, it's that he disobeyed and did the opposite. So quenching the Holy Spirit is just stopping what he's doing. It's just saying, I'm not going to do that. Grieving the Holy Spirit is not only am I not going to do that, but I'm going to do the exact opposite of it. It kind of reminds me of the definition of sin. A lot of people say the definition of sin is to miss the mark. And I've heard that many times. But sin is not when you're trying to hit the target and just happen to miss. That's not what sin is. Sin is the target's over here. I'm going to aim this way. So sin is I'm not even going for the target anymore. I'm going in a whole nother direction, completely away from what God said. That's being sinful. So anyway, this section was so important, and I just want to make sure that we hit a whole bunch of highlights here because it is so good. But please read this on your own too, and do a deep dive into these different sections, because it is so important to fully understand what Paul is saying to the church in Ephesus here. And I hope you enjoyed this time, and I will see you next week. Bye.